Welcome to this week's episode of Nutrition Science Bites. We're into Series 3, and my guest this week is Associate Professor Dorit Samocha-Bonet. Now, I know I haven't pronounced that absolutely correctly, but that's the Aussie way of saying it. So a big welcome, Dorit, and I just want to let everyone know that you're a conjoint Associate Professor at the School of Clinical Medicine at St Vincent's Clinical Campus there at the University of New South Wales, but you're also a dietitian and clinical researcher at Garvan Institute of Medical Research. So that's a lot of hats to wear. And I'm so excited that I've invited you to talk about metabolism today, because I know that's the area that you specialise in teaching of the students, and also you've worked and still work in metabolic syndrome. So welcome.
That's right. Thank you very much, Claire. It's very good to be here.
So first up, I think it can be really confusing for the people to even know what their metabolism is. You hear that word bandied around, oh, I've got a slow metabolism, a fast metabolism, but what do we actually mean when we say that word metabolism?
You're right, and people use it in different ways and not necessarily the right way, and we'll probably touch on that in the podcast. But metabolism, simply put, is the sum of work done by all our body cells to keep us alive. We measure it in energy units, joules or calories, and it encompasses everything that our body does, from brain action to the heartbeats, just everything, movement, whether it's conscious or unconscious.
So would you say, could you liken it then like to a car? So if our body was a car, would our metabolism then kind of be measured by the amount of fuel it costs our car to run, that we have to put into our car? Is that kind of an analogy to
That's
a car?
This is a very good analogy, actually. This is the fuel that we put in the car before we go on a trip. And I'll actually use this analogy in the podcast to explain how it changes because of different physiological states.
Yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it? I think then, if that is a good analogy, I think that helps people understand why then different human bodies have different metabolisms or require different amounts of that energy for their fuel, because when we drive around, there's everything from little cars to bigger cars to buses to tractors, all used for different purposes. So that's a relief then. We can all just think of our metabolism as though we're all a different car. Maybe we want to think about what kind of car we is. So just building on from that then, Dorit, so now that we've got a bit of a concept to go by for metabolism, is there a difference? Because sometimes you hear people talk about their metabolism, but then you also hear people talk about metabolic rate. So how does metabolic rate relate to metabolism, which is really that functions that are keeping us, upright and moving around and thinking?
That's right. So the currency of metabolism, likened to the fuel in the car, is energy. And when we say metabolism, we mean the energy required to sustain us. But when we say metabolic rate, we mean how much energy our body needs during a certain period of time. Whether it's when we just wake up, whether it's when we sleep, after we eat, and all of that. So we're talking about the speed of energy when we're saying metabolic rate. And when we're saying metabolism, we're talking about the actual work and the energy required.
So, Dorit, you saying that now, I immediately, and I think people have probably just figured out, oh, okay, so sleeping, housework, walking, then your metabolic rate obviously is going to be different for all of those different activities. And, going back to the car, when when I've got the car on idle versus you've got your foot flat to the floor, your metabolic rate, using that same analogy as the car, is different depending on how hard you're driving your body. Would that be right?
Yes, that's very correct. So we all have a basal metabolic rate that can actually be measured. We can measure your resting metabolic rate, which is the closest as possible to your basal metabolic rate. And we all have an energy requirement to function when we lie in bed, whether sleeping or first thing in the morning. We do burn energy for all the actions in the body, for the enzymes to work, for the molecules to be pumped through cell membranes, for the heart to beat. This is the basal metabolic rate, and it makes up a large proportion of the total energy expenditure that we need to sustain ourselves. Some 70% of it is our basal. Yeah,
wow,
it's quite
70%.
It's quite large. And on top of that, we have the energy required to move, to perform physical activity, whether it's a light housework or more strenuous work on the treadmill in the gym. And even to process the food we eat, we need energy. This is called the thermic effect of food. It's the energy required for our feeding. And yeah.
I guess that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So, but I think people are going to be really surprised at just how much energy it takes to run your body. But I guess when you think about it, like you said, like your heart's got to keep beating, all of those things that happen without even our conscious control, our lungs, those muscles are working quite hard, aren't they? So
Yes.
Given all of that, and given we've already, like with the cars, we see there's lots of different size and styles of cars and efficiencies of cars. So what are those main factors? Like you said, for the variable part, exercise is variable, but given that 70% is actually just the energy cost of running us, keeping us ticking over, are there factors that even affect how much that 70% total is?
Yes, absolutely. So think of it in terms of your body size. The larger your body, the more cells you have there that need energy. And so body size is a key factor that determines our basal metabolic rate. And within our body, it's really important how much fat-free mass we have, because and this is mainly our muscles, because muscle is taking a lot of energy to operate. So if you compare between muscle and fat, muscle, the energy required to operate the muscle is a lot higher. So if you look at different body compositions, a person, say, with the same weight, let's take an example of two males who are 80 kilograms, and one person has 70% of fat-free mass, and the other
muscle. 70% muscle, yep.
Yes, and the other person has 80% of muscle. The person with the 80% muscle is predicted to have a higher basal metabolic rate.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. And I guess if I go back to my car analogy, would that be a bit like, and I know we've got all kinds of modern electric cars, but in the olden days, would that be like having a car that's got a couple of extra cylinders, so a bit more power in it? So everybody knows if you've got a big car with a big engine and lots of cylinders, you're going to be heading to the petrol station a lot more and putting more fuel. It needs more fuel. Is that?
That's right.
Yeah. And one of the other interesting things that you just said, I think that word fat-free mass can be confusing. So and you do hear people throw that word around. So fat-free mass in plain language is the word for how much muscle. And what you've said is more muscle, more fuel you need, just like with our big car versus our 1 or 2 cylinder type car.
That's exactly right, Claire. And therefore, when you compare between men and women, for the same weight, since women have more fat mass and less muscle mass, usually women basal metabolic rate, when we measure it in clinical facilities, they're usually lower because of the body composition. So it's not just the body size, not just your height and weight, it's also how your body is composed in terms of fat versus muscle.
And so, well, I think we all see that, and women and men, we distribute our fat and our muscle tissue differently. So, body size, whether you're male or female, and so is there a separate effect of genetics apart from the genetics of your sex? Is there also a genetic effect? Like, can you have inherit a family, or can you have parents where you've got genes and you have got a higher metabolic rate, or is it all determined by those other factors that you've already said?
It's quite complex, and those genetic factors are quite intertwined, because we do know that body weight is strongly heritable. We have classical studies from the 1990s by Claude Bouchard and Stanker, and they showed in twins that if one person within the twin pairs has a high BMI, the twin is very likely to also have a high BMI, and vice versa.
Right.
Extreme leanness is also very, very heritable. So your body size, and going from that, your body energy needs are going to be determined by your genetics, but not just by your genetics. So this is the good thing, because we are born with our genes, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah. So, Dorit, I must say, there are many times, I think, for lots of people where we go, we wish we could change our genes, maybe trade in some of your ancestors, but that does kind of make sense. And I think for most of us, when we look at our family members, we can, unless you're adopted, of course, or you don't know who your ancestors were, you can kind of see a similarity in so many aspects of your body and even, your habits compared to your ancestors. So that makes sense. So if we're not happy with our metabolism, we can blame our parents. Is that right?
Partly, yes, partly. Certainly for body size, we are bound by our genetics, but it's important that the listeners would understand that it's not just the genetics. There's a lot of behavioral, environmental, and other effects that are not our own genetics.
Okay, so you've told us about the things that basically affect our basal metabolism, but I heard you say that there are some things you can change. So if you want to increase your metabolic rate, then what are those things that people could actually do?
So remember the muscle, how important is the muscle for determining your metabolic rate?
Yes, you said it was very important.
That's right.
It was a big thing, yes. So
Yes.
I remember you saying that.
Yeah, so especially when we age and we tend to lose our muscle mass, so working on maintaining a good muscle mass throughout the life cycle, especially when we age, is really, really important. Building up muscle can be done even when we are older. It's possible. And so it's really an important factor that is amenable and can be, worked on to increase our metabolic rate.
Yeah, that's a really big thing then, isn't it? So, because that might be something that sounds hard, increasing your muscle mass, but that does really make sense. If you want to get another cylinder into the engine, then you've basically got to go out and get it by working those muscles. So you said that as you get older, your muscle mass deteriorates. Is that simply because we're aging, or is that because we don't do as much as we get older?
It is, there are many factors involved, and obviously if they're coupled, if we are less active as well as aging, then we lose more muscle mass. So people have to consciously work on being physically active. And even, as simple as walking every day can make a difference.
Yeah, well, I guess if you're walking, that's going to protect those leg muscles. But if you really feel like you've lost a lot of muscle mass, then perhaps that's something that someone who's aging could also talk to their GP about. Because would you say that they might potentially need to be referred to a specialist like an exercise physiologist or a physiotherapist if there's particular issues for them, maybe got an injury or something?
Absolutely. So when in special circumstances like injury or after a long period of being bedridden, definitely building up your muscle in a clever way or in a way that would be harmless to you and beneficial to you would benefit from consulting with an exercise physiologist or a physiotherapist. That's a very good point. It's the same as consulting with a dietitian about your nutrition.
Okay, and I know we're going to move on to that, but going back to my car, I guess when I think about it, like if my car's broken down or even before it breaks down, like I take it to get serviced regularly, when the tyres need to be replaced, we do all of that. So it kind of makes sense, doesn't it, that our body, as our body is getting older, or an injury, that we do need to do something to make sure it gets back to being like as good as new, doesn't it? It does. It really does make sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Look, I sometimes think, and back to the car analogy, we make sure we service a car at least once a year. We test it and all of that. And with our bodies, we actually, a lot of the times, we take it for granted. We abuse it a little bit. And we don't quite pay attention to our body needs. And we did mention spoke about referrals to an exercise physiologist or physiotherapist, but there are so many exercises that you can do at home in front of, a YouTube video to maintain and sustain your muscle mass. And so many people are doing it, perhaps even more now after we had COVID and people turned to online videos to maintain their, mental and body sanity.
Yeah, that's a really great tip. And I'll give a shout out to my colleagues here at the University of Newcastle. They've developed one that can be used by the general public, but especially for people with type 2 diabetes, and it's called EcoFit. So I'll put a link into the show notes there. So we've given a couple of really good tips. Now I want to bring you back to the point that you said about, like, if you need specialised nutrition support, you'd get referred to an accredited practicing dietitian. Noting our bias, we're both dietitians. But does the food that you eat, can that change your metabolic rate? You did mention that when you eat your food, there's an energy cost even to digest it. But can I change my metabolism, metabolic rate based on the food that I do or do not choose to eat?
Well, It's funny because I googled what the public would find if they ask, can I eat something to increase my basal metabolic rate?
Oh,
So I
right.
googled it because many people go to Dr. Google or Dr. ChatGPT to find out whether there's something they can eat. And there were lots of mistakes cited because people do, it's a wishful thinking that you can eat something that will make your, basal metabolic rate go up in a significant way to actually affect your energy expenditure. There are very few studies about the active ingredient in chilies, which is really hard for me to pronounce, capsaicin.
Yeah,
Um,
capsaicin, I think I say. Any
capsaicin.
way people want to say it, I think is fine. But if we remember the hot thing in the chilies.
The hot thing in the chili, there are a few studies. One is actually okay in its quality, but you know how it is in nutritional research. When we only have a couple of studies saying something, we regard it as weak evidence.
Yeah,
So, and I don't know if there'll be large cohort studies, and it's really hard to study. In
yep,
any case, the effect would be minimal and
yep,
negligible.
yep.
But anyway, having chili with your food is awesome.
Yeah, tastes
Harissa,
great.
or it is great. And there's a bit of evidence, again, not very strong for caffeine.
Yep,
So coffee, black tea, green tea. But again, the effect would be minimal compared to sustaining your muscle mass or even extending your muscle mass by
I've
physical
got
activity.
I've got a really good idea, Dorit. So we did a podcast on coffee and talked about all the good reasons. How about if people go for a walk and then meet their friends for a coffee, and then they're going to get a teeny weeny jolt from the caffeine. Sorry everyone, this only applies if you're the ones who can tolerate caffeine. And then you're going to get the double whammy. And then maybe if you're meeting your friends, park the car for dinner, go to a chili restaurant and work a bit further away. So then you're going to get the minimal effect of the chili, but you're going to get the exercise as well. Would that work for your metabolism?
100%.
Okay.
100%. Yes, that's a great idea, Claire.
Okay. And
But
then you did say tea though. So was it any kind of tea or did I hear you say green tea?
I said black and green because you need the
Mm.
caffeine. There are many
Yep.
compounds in tea, but I think it's the caffeine that may increase your basal metabolic rate. But again, very, very very negligible. So the effect size is not very large. So don't expect to
Yeah.
say. I don't even know if it's detectable when we measure basal metabolic rate in someone who's a coffee virgin, and after having them drink, the good 3 cups of coffee every day for a week, whether we'll see a noticeable difference in the basal metabolic rate.
Well,
Um,
Dorit, that sounds like a good study to maybe a coffee company would like to fund you to do that. But I think that is good news because sometimes you do hear people, which is why we did the podcast on coffee, saying, "Oh no, you shouldn't have coffee. Oh no, you shouldn't drink tea." And yeah, so that's actually some good news, even though you said they're minor. So at least people for their metabolism, caffeine may do some benefit, but it's not something you have to go overboard if you're not a coffee drinker at all. So they're minor
Absolutely.
things. But what about, can I ask you about types of food? Because again, I think if you go back to Dr. Google, people can Google special diets to boost their metabolism where you must eat, a certain amount of protein, or you must eat a certain amount of animal products, or you must not eat a certain amount of animal products. So does the macronutrient, which is just the protein, fat, and carbohydrate, does that matter for your metabolism when you're thinking about what type of dietary pattern overall you might want to eat, or whether you might want to go on a special diet?
It's not your metabolism that should drive your decision to change your diet. Certainly a high quality diet with high quality protein and fat and carbohydrates would make a huge difference to your body weight
Right.
and body size. The acute thermic effect of food in different compositions would be different for protein, fat, and carbohydrates. But again, it's a transient effect that does not affect your baseline. So,
Right.
if you like, I'm trying to think if there were, yeah, I don't know if I can liken it again to the car analogy, but your diet
Yep.
definitely, but indirectly affect your metabolism, because we know that a healthy, say, a Mediterranean style diet has the potential to sustain you at a healthy body weight,
Yep.
even to lose weight, and to not be hungry, which is so important when
Yes,
we
that's
are
true.
changing our diet. Because if we're hungry, and we will probably talk about the weight reduced state that induces constant hunger, but if we're eating a wholesome diet, whole foods with dietary fiber and prebiotics, complex carbohydrates, healthy, high quality protein, then we are less likely to be hungry.
Yeah. So, Dorit, you'll be pleased to know that on the No Money, No Time website, where we'll link the podcast, we've got lots of resources about what does a healthy, balanced diet actually mean. We've actually done a podcast on that one as well. But you've raised a really important point, and I think this is something we haven't discussed, but we need to, because you certainly do hear about effects on metabolism from reducing your body size. Now, that kind of makes sense again when we think about the car. If we switch from, a bigger car to a smaller car, well, we know that it needs less fuel. Especially if you switch from a car with a bigger engine to a smaller engine. So what actually does happen to your metabolism if you're consciously deciding you're going to reduce your body size? I think we've already guessed less energy, but what's physiologically happening there?
To understand the physiology of the weight reduced state, we have to understand a little bit of evolution,
Yep.
because we didn't always live in the industrial world where food is so available to us, and
Yeah.
we had to do with with the food that was available and when it was available. Winter different from summer, a drought period different from a lush period. So the body has mechanisms that are survival mechanisms to protect its energy stores. The largest energy store in our body is our fat. So when we go into a negative energy balance, because we restrict the caloric intake, because we are now deciding New Year's resolution, I want to lose weight, what happens to the body, it goes into a defense mechanism to protect. And this is very complex and involves many molecules named hormones that are circulating in a bloodstream and affect every possible organ, from the brain to the pancreas to really everywhere, to maintain our body fat stores. So everyone, if they understand that, they will understand why after we are successfully losing weight, and you will agree with me as a dietitian, people are doing beautifully at losing weight. So they decide they're going to lose weight, and they lose sometimes a kilo a week or less than a kilo a week, and they gradually lose weight, but then they're stuck. They reach a plateau. Usually it happens within the first 6-12 months, more like 6. And then they're stuck, and they would come to you and say, I hardly eat. I'm really restricting myself, but I now do not lose weight. these are the mechanisms that kick in when our body goes into a deficit mode, and they are sabotaging huge efforts to lose weight.
Yeah, so Dorit, I think many listeners will identify with that. You know, they've been going so well, and then the body's figured out what's going on and goes into defense mode. So in some ways, we really should congratulate our body for having our survival at heart. But on the other hand, it's very frustrating for people that now their metabolism has become so efficient that your body is sort of going, no, you're going to survive this famine that it perceives is happening out there. But one thing that I think for people, especially if they've experienced some health gain around that time, that's a really important time to go back and talk to their GP in case there are other strategies or their health needs to be reviewed or they're eligible for other sort of support strategies or a referral to other health professionals or building up that muscle. So is there any evidence that during weight reduction then that if someone is building up the muscle mass, so trying to get more cylinders into the car engine, can that offset any of these challenges with maintaining that weight loss?
Yes, certainly. So there are actually living examples of people who are successful at losing weight and at maintaining the reduced weight. There's quite a large database that's available to look at online. The American National Registry, I forgot what it's called. I will look it up and tell you. I think it's, what's it called?
Yes,
anyway,
I've heard of that too. I've heard of that too, yes.
So it was established in the 90s, and nowadays it has some 10,000 people who volunteer to tell their story of weight loss success. To get into the database, you would have had to lose at least 14 kilograms, and it's around the 10% in people living with obesity, and to maintain the reduced weight for 12 months. So
right.
what the volunteers tell us is that they consciously, 94% of them, 98% of them say that they are consciously making changes to their diet. So they're not just living the same and thinking that it will, be increasing my physical activity. I'm not going to do anything with my diet. It's consciously changing your diet, and 94% of people report that they increase their physical activity, and the most reported one is walking.
All right. Well, actually, that's good news, and I remember the name. It's called the National Weight Control Registry, so we can put a link to that in the show notes if people want to do it. That's such a valuable thing that they've done, is followed up people who've worked with their body, so to speak, to successfully maintain that amount of weight loss. And I always find it interesting, Dorit, it's like that's the amount to halve your risk of developing type 2 diabetes. So that's kind of good news that, yes, you need to be more physically active, but it's walking. So that's really positive, and they're consciously. And well, congratulations to those people, because I think with all the food ads, that must be very hard to continue on with their healthy eating.
Continuous caloric restriction is hard. And that's why we see a lot of the weight regain. We can be very, very motivated at first and cut our energy intake down, to 70% of our energy requirement. But to sustain that, studies do show, and then mathematical models based on those studies show that very early on, you are not actually as severely restricted. Even with a lot of support, obviously support makes a difference, but even with the support, it creeps up and you're not able, but it's not your fault. It's all those protective mechanisms that I
Yeah.
mentioned. It's the hunger goes up and
Yeah.
keeps, it's the food talk. The food
Yeah.
talks to you, the
Yes.
chatter, the food chatter.
Yeah.
And you constantly want to eat, and there are many good, very good studies, including one done in Melbourne by Priya Sumitran and Joe Proiedo that was published more than 13 years ago in the New England Journal of Medicine, showing that the level of hunger, even when people are already at weight maintenance, during this plateau, the level of hunger is a lot higher. And the level of the hormones that regulate appetite and hunger, they're changing as well, and they're dictating hunger and wanting to eat all the time.
Yeah.
So it's very hard, and it's our physiology that makes it so hard.
Dorit, I actually know Professor Joe Pareto, who's now retired, and what he always said, which is consistent with what you're saying, is that he felt that people need the support during that maintenance, because he basically said a similar thing, that, sometimes people do need medical support for getting started, but he felt people needed more support for when the physiological response around the 6 months and you first start to plateau. But I would encourage people to go back and have a chat to their GP around that time. With the newer medications coming on the market, there may be other strategies that people need to improve their weight-related health and to conserve their metabolism. But I think we've heard clearly that while there are some small nutrition tweaks in regard to, the chilies and the teas and the caffeine for boosting our metabolism, the biggest bang for our buck on our metabolism is keeping our muscles amount and then keeping our muscles working. So thanks very much for that great chat about metabolism today, but I'm not going to let you go yet, because one of the other aspects of this is that we like to hear about the recipe that you're going to give us for No Money, No Time. We're going to call it after you, Dorit. And what is that recipe and why did you pick that?
This is my granola. I can't remember, probably maybe 10 years ago, a friend gave me a very beautiful, jar, and it was full with yummy granola.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with it, because the granola that I used to try from the shops wasn't exactly right for me. It was either too sweet, like sweet that it was painful in my throat, sweet,
Yeah.
or it had dry fruit that I dislike, or so that granola made my household's breakfasts different, because not just me, but my husband as well fell in love with the breakfast of granola, and I take my breakfast really, really seriously.
Yeah.
It's probably calorie-wise, it may be one of the highest calories that I eat is actually in the morning.
Yeah.
It's made of this yummy granola that I wrote a recipe for No Money, No Time, and I have it on goat's plain yogurt,
Yeah.
and I sprinkle chia seeds and shredded coconut on it, and on it I just put whatever fruit you can find. And now it's summer and I'm so happy. I like my granola more in summer because I've got the mango and the kiwi and the papaya, and the banana is all around. So yeah, this is my breakfast with a good barista made coffee.
Oh, sounds delicious. And something
And because
interesting.
of all the
No, you
because
go
of all
ahead.
the nuts, and and the oats that we know is very satisfying and satiating, it keeps me going. It's like the car on on a fuel, just fueled up. I fuel up every morning, and it keeps me going for hours, and then I can just mind my work and my and I don't need to worry about I'm not hungry.
It sounds like the perfect recipe for helping people get their metabolism supported for the day. So we're going to link that and call that after you on No Money, No Time. But thank you very much for being my guest on Nutrition Science Bites today.
Thank you.